If you're listening to this Wild West tale, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts on Clara's fate, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of her journey. Your support keeps these stories alive on this channel, so saddle up and ride with us into the dust and danger of the frontier. The town of Dry Creek lay under a sky the color of ash, its sun-bleached streets lined with shuttered windows and weary faces. The drought had stripped the land bare, leaving hunger and debt as the only things that grew. On this particular evening, a hush spread through the crowd gathered by the courthouse steps. There were no cattle or wagons for sale, no horses up for bidding. Instead, standing on the makeshift platform, hands folded tight against her skirt, was Clara Hayes. She had never imagined her life reduced to this moment. The last of her family's land had been seized, her parents long in their graves, and her cabin was nothing more than rotting timbers ready to collapse. She had run out of favors to ask and out of nights she could stomach going hungry. The idea had been her own, unthinkable, shameful, yet her only choice. She would auction herself for shelter, a roof, food enough to survive. The murmurs from the crowd cut deeper than the desert wind, every stare like a weight pressing on her shoulders. The sheriff called for the bidding to begin, his voice cracked from both age and the dust. A wiry shopkeeper offered a pittance, muttering that he needed someone to keep his accounts. A ranch hand shouted his bid, smirking as he bragged about needing another pair of hands to scrub floors. Each voice rang with ownership, not compassion, as though Clara were a mule to be bought cheap. Clara stood tall despite the heat stinging her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. But inside, shame tangled with fear. This was survival, she told herself. Better humiliation than an unmarked grave beyond town. The bidding slowed, voices losing interest. A few men laughed, shaking their heads. Even desperate, she wasn't worth much to them. The sheriff prepared to close the auction when a new voice cut through the air, low but steady. "I'll take her." Every head turned toward the man leaning on the hitching post. Elias McGraw. Broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, a rancher whose land stretched farther than most could ride in a day. He was no stranger, yet he was nearly a ghost in town, a man who kept to himself after losing his wife years back. Rumors painted him as solitary, perhaps broken. No one had expected him here. You'll take her," the sheriff stammered, uncertain how to record such a bid. "I'll give her room in my house, food at my table, and work if she wants it," Elias said. His gaze didn't waver from Clara's face. He wasn't appraising her like the others. He was searching, as though measuring her resolve. The crowd erupted with mutters and snickers. "Why waste your coin on her?" one man jeered. "Charity case," another sneered. Some whispered uglier things, guessing at motives. Clara's stomach twisted. Could this be a trap wrapped in kindness? But Elias's offer stood unshaken. The sheriff, sensing no higher bid, declared it done. Elias stepped forward, tipped his hat, and extended his hand. Clara hesitated, every muscle tensed, then placed her palm in his. His hand was calloused, steady, yet his grip was not one of possession. He helped her down from the platform as though she were no different from any neighbor. The walk to his wagon passed in silence, though the weight of the town stairs clung to her like burrs. Children peered from behind skirts, men whispered, women clutched shawls tighter. Clara held her head high. If nothing else, she would leave them without the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The wagon wheels creaked as Elias guided his horses out of Dry Creek. Clara sat stiff on the bench, unsure of what words, if any, could bridge the distance between them. Finally, she forced herself to ask, "Why? Why me?" Elias kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Because you needed shelter. Because I had it to spare. That's reason enough." His voice carried no pity, only plain fact. Clara studied his profile, trying to read the truth behind his words. His jaw was strong, withered by years of labor, his eyes shadowed by loss, yet she saw no cruelty in him. Still, trust was a luxury she couldn't grant so easily. Hours later, as dust bled across the plains, the ranch came into view. The house was sturdy, its windows glowing with lamplight, the barn standing tall against the fading sky. It wasn't wealth beyond dreams, but it was a fortress compared to her crumbling shack. The scent of hay and wood smoke filled the air, warm and grounding. Inside, Elias showed her the small room beside the kitchen. A bed, a chest, even a quilt folded neatly. "It's yours," he said simply. No conditions, no demands. He left her there to settle, as though she were a guest rather than something won at auction. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers across the quilt. Suspicion lingered, but so did a fragile, dangerous spark of hope. For the first time in years, she was not cold, not starving, not entirely alone. Yet questions churned in her mind like storm clouds. What did Elias truly expect of her? And more frightening still, what might she come to expect of him? The night closed in around the ranch, the silence heavy but not empty. Clara lay back, staring at the wooden beams above her. Survival had brought her here, but survival was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the fear, a different possibility stirred, something she hardly dared to name. And as she drifted toward sleep, the thought pressed in, tomorrow would tell her whether she had found freedom or merely traded one cage for another. The morning sun spilled across the plains, painting the ranch in a haze of gold. Clara rose early, her hands folded tight in her lap as she listened to the creak of the floorboards beyond her door. She had slept, truly slept, for the first time in months, but the weight of uncertainty pressed her awake. The room was warm, the quilt still tucked around her legs, yet part of her braced for the sound of demands, commands, or worse. Instead, Elias's voice called from the kitchen, steady and plain. "Coffee's hot. If you're hungry, there's bread and ham on the table." When she stepped into the room, he was already at the stove, shoulders broad beneath his shirt, moving with the quiet precision of someone long accustomed to solitude. He didn't look up, didn't leer, didn't speak with ownership. He simply poured her coffee, then returned to his own plate as though this arrangement were the most natural thing in the world. Clara ate cautiously, every bite a test. Yet as the silence stretched, she realized he meant it. She was not expected to serve, to entertain, to bend herself into someone else's will. That realization unsettled her almost as much as it comforted her. Survival had always demanded a cost. What kind of man offered shelter and asked nothing in return? After breakfast, she followed him outside, determined to earn her keep before he could decide otherwise. The ranch sprawled wide, fences in need of mending, cattle restless from the heat, fields thirsty for rain. Clara took to the work with a stubborn pride, hauling buckets, stacking hay, blistering her hands on tools. Elias said little, but his quiet nods told her he noticed. By nightfall, exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but it was a clean exhaustion, earned by sweat rather than shame. When she sank onto the porch steps, Elias joined her, setting down a tin cup of water. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was companionable, filled with the chorus of crickets and the faint lowing of cattle. Days bled into weeks, each one reshaping her understanding. Clara found herself laughing once, startled by the sound. She learned to hold a rifle steady, her hands trembling less each time Elias guided her aim. She discovered she was stronger than hunger and loss had allowed her to believe. Elias never pressed her with questions, never reached where he wasn't welcome, but he listened when she spoke. Slowly, her story spilled out, her parents' graves, the debts left behind, the gnawing despair that had led her to that platform. One evening, after a long day repairing fence lines, he spoke of his wife, taken by fever 5 winters past. His voice cracked only once, but in that crack, Clara heard the depth of his solitude. He had not rescued her to own her. He had simply seen himself in her, a soul teetering at the edge of being swallowed whole by loneliness. Yet peace on the frontier was never more than a borrowed gift. The warning came in the form of smoke curling on the horizon, then the thundering hooves of neighbors riding hard to spread word. Raiders had struck a homestead 2 miles east. They were heading west, toward Elias's land. Clara's chest tightened, memories of the auction surging back. Helplessness had once defined her, stripped her to nothing but a desperate bargain. She would not feel that way again. As Elias checked his rifle and loaded his revolver, she stood beside him. "Tell me what to do," she said, voice firm despite the quiver in her hands. He studied her, brows furrowed as though torn between shielding her and honoring her strength. Finally, he handed her the spare rifle. Stay close. Aim true. Don't waste a shot. The night split open with the roar of hooves and the shouts of men who had come to take what they pleased. Lantern lights spilled across the yard as figures emerged from the darkness, guns flashing, horses shrieking. Elias fired first, the crack of his rifle echoing across the plains. Clara braced herself against the porch rail, heart hammering as she squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but she saw the rider veer, his aim shattered. Fear surged, sharp and blinding, yet beneath it throbbed something fiercer, resolve. She reloaded with trembling fingers, teeth grit against the chaos. Bullets tore through the barn, splinters flying, but she did not run. She fired again, and again, until the air stank of powder and sweat and blood. The raiders, expecting easy prey, found themselves facing steel and unbroken will. One fell, another fled, and soon the rest scattered into the night, their shouts fading into silence. The yard was littered with smoke and broken fence posts. Clara's hand shook violently, the rifle slipping from her grip as her knees buckled. Elias caught her, steadying her without a word. For a long moment, they stood together in the wreckage, the only sounds their ragged breaths and the settling groan of the barn. When at last she found her voice, it came low but steady. I wasn't helpless. Elias's eyes met hers, fierce pride burning there. No, Clara. You never were. The truth of it seared through her, banishing the last shreds of shame she had carried from that courthouse platform. She had not been bought. She had not been pitted. She had chosen to stand, to fight, to claim her place here with her own strength. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in fire and gold, Elias turned to her. This land is yours as much as mine now. But you don't owe me anything. If you wish to leave, the wagon will take you wherever you choose. She stared at him, at the man who had seen her as more than a transaction, who had fought beside her, who had given her both freedom and the choice of what to do with it. The decision formed like breath in her chest, undeniable and clear. I'll stay, she whispered, her voice carrying more certainty than it ever had. Not because I must. Because I choose to. The wind shifted across the plains, carrying the scent of fresh earth, as if the land itself had heard her vow. For the first time since she had stepped onto that auction block, Clara felt not like a pawn of fate, but like the author of her own story. And as Elias stood beside her, rifle in hand, the broken horizon before them, she knew this was more than survival. This was the beginning of a life she had never dreamt possible, a future forged in fire, trust, and choice.